We arrive in John's Gospel abruptly. Jesus has already been arrested and dragged before the religious authorities, and now he is taken to Pilate, the Roman governor of Palestine. And the first question that Pilate asks is the same in all four Gospels. Are you a king? Now, given that the figure standing before him is as he is, Pilate is understandably incredulous. From the charges being leveled at Jesus, Pilate must have expected a revolutionary, a man with an army up in the hills ready to attempt an overthrow of the Roman occupation. But Jesus is in chains. So Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus responds to this question with a question. Do you say this on your own? Or have others told you about me? You see, if this is Pilate's question, then what he really wants to know is whether or not Jesus is a threat to Caesar. If it's a question put into Pilate's mouth by the Jewish religious authorities, then it asks whether Jesus is the promised Messianic king, and therefore a threat to the Jewish authorities. Pilate's question helps us to see one of the problems with this feast, namely that we Americans don't really know what a king is. After 200 plus years of the American experiment in democracy, the whole idea of a monarchy is either tyrannical or quaint. We conjure up images of a despot ruling at the expense of his people, such as the king or crown prince of Saudi Arabia. Or we think of anachronistic or largely symbolic royals in Buckingham Palace. So Pilate's question can also be our question. What do you mean by a king? Pope Pius XI established the feast of Christ the King in 1925 to repudiate secularistic and atheistic communist systems that were gaining strength against Christ's kingdom early in the 20th century. But other systems, materialism, individualism, pluralism, and I could say political correctism, also stand against the kingdom of Christ in our own century. Consider, for example, power. The most recent election cycle saw billions of dollars spent in pursuit of political power. Culture wars are alive and well. The New York Times Book Review constantly has multiple books attacking Christianity, especially Catholic and evangelical Christianity. Heck, outside of working together to feed the homeless on Thanksgiving Day, it may be one area where we truly are on the same page with our friends at First Baptist. Our own city bears the marks of struggles for power. And if that's not enough, think of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., a city of monuments where you can't go 2 blocks without running into a statue of somebody, many of which were erected to people who lived lives of great sacrifice, while many others of presidents, military leaders, and conquerors. I tell you all this, my friends, because Christ's kingdom is not about this sort of power. The monument of Christ's kingdom is not a military emblem. It is a cross. The scene of the cross wasn't just an execution. It was a coronation. And Jesus reigns from the cross precisely because he defeated his enemies through apparent weakness. Someone like that, we ask with Pilate, what are you? Who are you? When Pilate says, then you are a king, Jesus confirms it. But he leaves no doubt that his kingdom does not belong to this world. And the two ways it differs from kingdoms of this world are what it's built upon and how it spreads. First, the foundation of Jesus' kingdom. Jesus' kingdom, or kingship, rests not upon the amount of force he brings, but upon who he is. And that wonderful imagery from the 7th chapter, the 13th verse of the book of the prophet Daniel, we see the vision of the Son of Man, the Messianic King, coming on or with the clouds of heaven. The logical temptation is to succumb to the mythic representation of our Lord coming through the clouds. But it doesn't say that. It says coming with or on the clouds, and that is pivotal. Remember that when the children of Israel were traveling through the wilderness, God went with them as a fire at night and a cloud during the day. When God descended to Mount Sinai to give the law to Moses, a cloud came down on the mountain. All through the Old Testament, clouds are associated with God's presence. And Daniel's vision isn't that of a king coming through the clouds, but God himself coming down on the clouds. Jesus' authority rests upon his identity as God, the creator and sustainer of all that is, by whom all things were made. The second way Jesus' kingdom is different is how it expands. Human history is replete with accounts of kingdoms that expanded by the sword, through violence. We often think of Islam as one religion that expanded by the sword. And dare I say, there is an element of violence associated with Jesus' kingdom. It's just not the sort of violence Pilate would ever have expected. Yes, if Jesus wanted to overthrow Rome's military power, he would have recruited soldiers to fight to prevent his arrest. But Jesus did not fight. Instead, he submitted willingly to the powers assembled before him. When an over-eager Pilate, Peter took the sword and cut off the soldier's ear, our Lord rebuked him and commanded him not to take up arms. The violence I'm talking about is not the sort of violence Peter envisioned. To that, the theologian Paul Zoll says it this way: the kingdom of heaven is violent in the same way that the plant bursts through the soil when it grows. It uproots one's life in the place and context of one's inherited values and loyalties. It twists and bends as it also reshapes. It is not a process. It is not a slow burn. It is a ripping and tearing, a reformation. It is the contemporary work of God in lives, in history. Christ's kingdom expands in us, the church, and through us in the world by doing violence to our old hearts that are focused on power, arrogance, materialism, pride, and conforming them to Christ's heart, which lives to serve, heal, die, so that others may live. One last point, and that is what is not in the text today. The whole interrogation of our Lord by the religious authorities and Pilate is found in the 18th chapter of the Gospel of John. And there, John throws in two sections that are not part of the interrogation. They are Peter's denial of Jesus. And what's so significant about that? One commentator says, it's important because that's where the real trial is taking place, outside by the charcoal fire. Inside, Jesus is being questioned, but it is meaningless. Jesus moves with firm purpose to his own glorification, but outside, Simon Peter, the disciples, the church, is being questioned. And that trial is not going well at all. No matter what Pilate did, no matter what we do, Christ is still king. What mattered was whether Peter saw it. And what is at issue for us is whether we see it and realign our lives under his kingdom. So is Christ a king? The answer is yes. But the question for us, when we finally see it, will we bow before him?